The wind bit through Eliza's coat as she wandered deeper into the forest. Tears streamed down her face, freezing against her cheeks in the bitter cold. The argument with Daniel had been their worst yet. When he'd pulled the car over and told her to cool off with a walk, she hadn't expected him to drive away, leaving her stranded miles from the nearest town. 3 years of marriage, Orkney, she muttered, hugging herself against the chill. And this is what it comes to. As the afternoon dragged on, the temperature dropped further. Eliza realized with growing dread that she was thoroughly lost, and night was falling. Her phone had died hours ago. The first howl in the distance sent a spike of fear through her chest. Wolves. She quickened her pace, stumbling over roots and stones in the fading light. That's when she saw it. A massive brown bear, standing just 30 feet ahead on the path, its breath forming clouds in the frigid air. Eliza froze. Every wilderness safety video she'd ever seen flashed through her mind. Don't run. Don't scream. Play dead if attacked. The bear sniffed the air and took a step toward her. This was it. Abandoned by her husband and now about to be mauled by a bear. What a way to go. But the bear did something unexpected. It turned slightly, looking over its shoulder at her, then took a few steps forward before stopping and looking back again. Was it waiting for her? Against all rational thought, Eliza took a tentative step forward. The bear continued walking, pausing occasionally to ensure she was following. After 20 minutes of this strange procession, they emerged at the edge of a small clearing. In it sat a ranger's cabin, lights glowing warmly through the windows. The bear stopped at the tree line, watching as Eliza stumbled toward the cabin. She knocked desperately, and the door swung open to reveal a surprised park ranger. "Ma'am, are you all right?" he asked, ushering her inside where a fire blazed in the hearth. Through chattering teeth, Eliza explained what had happened, both with her husband and the bear. The ranger handed her a steaming mug of coffee. "That would be Martha," he said with a small smile. "She's something of a local legend. Used to be a rescue bear at a wildlife sanctuary before they released her. She's led more than one lost hiker to safety over the years. Something about her time with humans must have stuck." As Eliza warmed by the fire, the ranger made calls to arrange her transport back to town and to report Daniel for reckless endangerment. 3 months later, Eliza stood on the porch of her new cabin, watching as Martha lumbered out of the trees to collect the berries she'd left at the forest's edge. Her divorce had been finalized last week, and her job as an assistant at the park's Wildlife Education Center was going well. Sometimes the things we fear most turn out to be unexpected blessings, and sometimes the real animals aren't the ones with claws and fur. The weather shifted suddenly on their second day in the wilderness. Dark clouds rolled in, bringing with them a biting wind that whipped through the trees. Emily pulled her jacket tighter around her shoulders as she followed James up a steep incline. Her legs burned with fatigue, but she pushed forward, knowing that complaining would only worsen his already dark mood. James had been silent all morning, his movements becoming increasingly agitated with each passing hour. The tension between them stretched like a rubber band, ready to snap. When Emily accidentally knocked over his water bottle during their brief lunch break, the fragile peace shattered. "Can you do anything right?" James snarled, snatching up the half-empty bottle from the ground. "This was supposed to be a simple trip, and you're making everything difficult." Emily apologized quietly, but James wasn't listening. His voice rose as he listed every perceived failure of their marriage, each word cutting deeper than the last. This wasn't the controlled James who maintained appearances in public. This was the real man, the one only she knew existed. "I should have listened to my friends," he continued, pacing now. "They warned me about you, said you would drag me down. And look at us now, stuck in this miserable forest because our marriage is falling apart." Emily's eyes welled with tears. "This trip was your idea," she whispered. Something dangerous flashed in James's eyes. "And now I have a better one." He suddenly grabbed Emily's backpack, yanking it from her shoulders with such force that she stumbled backward. "James, what are you doing?" Panic rose in her throat as he unzipped her pack and began emptying it onto the ground. Her carefully packed supplies scattered across the forest floor. "Teaching you independence," he said coldly, pocketing her map, compass, and emergency whistle. "You rely on me too much. You need to learn to stand on your own." Emily reached for her water bottle, but James kicked it away, sending it tumbling down the slope they had just climbed. "James, please, this isn't funny." "Does it look like I'm laughing?" He shouldered his own pack and hers, now containing all their vital supplies. "Find your own way back to the car. Maybe some time alone will help you appreciate what I put up with." Emily stood frozen as James turned and continued up the trail. "The rangers said people die out here," she called after him, her voice breaking. James paused and looked back. "Then I guess you better figure things out quickly." His parting words floated back as he disappeared around a bend. "Consider this your opportunity to prove your worth. If you make it back, maybe our marriage has a chance after all." Emily stared at the empty trail, the magnitude of her situation sinking in like ice in her veins. She was alone without supplies, in a vast wilderness with a storm approaching, and no one in the world knew where she was. For several minutes after James vanished, Emily remained frozen in place. The forest that had seemed merely imposing before now loomed around her like a living prison. Her breath came in short, painful gasps as panic clawed up her throat. "This cannot be happening," she whispered to the empty air. Reality crashed over her in waves. No water, no food, no map or compass, no emergency whistle, not even a jacket beyond the light fleece she wore. The afternoon sun already hung low in the sky, the storm clouds thickening above the treetops. Emily tried to calm herself with deep breaths. She needed to think clearly. The trail they had followed must lead back to the parking area eventually. All she had to do was retrace their steps from the morning. Simple. She could do this. She started walking, careful to stay on the visible path. But after 30 minutes, the trail forked in a way she did not remember. Had they come from the left path or the right? The forest looked identical in both directions. Emily chose the right fork, moving with determined steps. An hour later, nothing looked familiar. The trail narrowed, then gradually faded into undergrowth until Emily could no longer discern any path at all. She turned back, but even the way she had come seemed to have vanished, consumed by the endless trees and rocks. Tears streamed down her face as she climbed a small ridge, hoping for a better vantage point. But all she could see was forest stretching to the horizon, with no sign of roads or clearings. The wind picked up, carrying the first few drops of rain. Emily shivered, her thin fleece already inadequate against the dropping temperature. She cupped her hands around her mouth and screamed for help until her voice grew hoarse. Only the mocking echo of her own cries answered, punctuated by the distant rumble of thunder. As daylight faded, Emily's desperation grew. She tried constructing a crude shelter from fallen branches, but the strengthening wind kept blowing it apart. The rain began in earnest, soaking through her clothes within minutes. Hunger gnawed at her stomach, and thirst made her tongue feel swollen in her mouth. Night descended like a heavy blanket, bringing with it new terrors. Strange rustling sounds emerged from the darkness. Twice she heard the distinctive snapping of branches that could only be made by something large. A long, mournful howl rolled through the forest, raising goosebumps on her arms. Emily huddled against the trunk of a massive pine tree, knees pulled tight to her chest. Each unfamiliar sound made her flinch. Every shadow seemed to move with purpose. Her thoughts turned to the warnings posted at the trailhead about bears, mountain lions, and wolves that called these woods home. Cold, wet, and utterly alone, Emily closed her eyes and tried not to imagine herself becoming prey to the wilderness that now surrounded her on all sides. Dawn broke with grudging reluctance, gray light filtering through the canopy of leaves. Emily awoke with a violent shiver, her clothes still damp from the night's rain. Her muscles screamed in protest as she uncurled from her position against the tree. Hunger and thirst had become constant companions, dulling her thoughts and weakening her limbs. She forced herself to stand, using the tree for support. The storm had passed during the night, but the forest floor remained slick with mud and wet leaves. Emily decided to follow a small game trail that seemed to lead downhill, reasoning that it might eventually connect with a stream where she could at least find water. The morning passed in a haze of stumbling progress and brief rests. Each step became an exercise in willpower. By midday, she had found a tiny creek and gratefully drank her fill, not caring about potential contaminants. Survival trumped caution now. Emily followed the creek, hoping it would lead to a larger body of water, or perhaps even civilization. The terrain grew increasingly rugged, forcing her to climb over fallen logs and navigate around dense thickets. Her focus narrowed to each individual step, her mind too exhausted for fear. That changed in an instant. As Emily rounded a large boulder, she froze. Not 20 feet away stood an enormous brown bear. The creature was massive, easily 7 feet tall on its hind legs, with a broad chest and powerful limbs. Time seemed to stop as Emily stared into the bear's small, intelligent eyes. Every wilderness safety tip she had ever heard vanished from her mind. Pure, primal terror flooded her system. Her heart hammered so violently she could feel it in her throat. The bear dropped to all fours, its head swinging from side to side as it assessed her. Emily knew with absolute certainty that she was going to die. Here, alone in the forest, with no one to witness or mourn her passing. She thought fleetingly of her parents, who would never know what happened to their daughter. She thought of James, who had abandoned her to this fate. The bear took a step forward, then another. Emily closed her eyes, unable to watch her own death approach. She felt tears leak from beneath her eyelids as she waited for crushing jaws or slashing claws, but the attack never came. After several heartbeats, Emily opened her eyes to find the bear standing just a few feet away, watching her with what seemed almost like curiosity. It sniffed the air around her, its wet nose twitching. Then incredibly, it made a soft chuffing sound and took a step backward. Emily remained absolutely still, afraid that any movement might trigger the aggression she still expected. The bear continued to watch her, its behavior nothing like the vicious attacks she had imagined. It seemed almost concerned. The standoff continued for what felt like eternity. Emily hardly dared to breathe as the massive bear studied her. Then, something extraordinary happened. The bear turned slightly away, took several steps, then looked back at Emily with an unmistakable expectancy in its gaze. When Emily remained frozen in place, the bear repeated the motion, more deliberately this time. It walked a short distance, stopped, and turned its head to look directly at her. The behavior was so unbear-like, so purposeful, that Emily felt her fear begin to give way to confusion. Against every rational thought, Emily took a tentative step forward. The bear immediately continued walking, maintaining a steady pace that allowed her to follow at a safe distance. Every few yards, the animal would pause and check that Emily was still behind. Her mind raced with possibilities. Bears did not behave this way. Everything she knew about wildlife suggested she should be dead, or at least under attack. Instead, this enormous predator seemed to be leading her somewhere. After 10 minutes of this strange procession, they entered a small clearing. Emily immediately understood the bear's unusual behavior. In the center of the clearing lay two small cubs, one clearly distressed. As Emily crept closer, she could see the cruel metal teeth of a trap clamped around the cub's front paw. The injured cub whimpered pitifully while its sibling nuzzled against it in apparent comfort. The mother bear approached her injured young, then looked back at Emily with an intelligence that sent shivers down her spine. The message was unmistakable. Help them. You want me to help your baby? Emily whispered in astonishment. The mother bear made a low rumbling sound that Emily chose to interpret as confirmation. The situation defied everything Emily thought she knew about wild animals. This mother bear, instead of attacking the nearest human in protective rage, had sought out help. She had recognized Emily as a potential savior rather than a threat. Despite her own desperate circumstances, Emily felt a sudden clarity. Her own survival seemed less important than helping this family. Perhaps it was empathy for another mother's distress, or simply the extraordinary nature of the encounter, but Emily knew she had to try. Okay, she said softly, taking a careful step toward the injured cub. I'll help if I can. The mother bear watched intently but made no threatening moves as Emily slowly approached. The injured cub whimpered louder, but its mother made a gentle huffing sound that seemed to calm it. Emily knelt beside the cruel trap, her own troubles temporarily forgotten as she focused on the immediate need before her. She had no tools, no supplies, and very little strength left. But looking into the frightened eyes of the cub and the somehow trusting gaze of its mother, Emily knew she had to find a way. Emily examined the trap with shaking hands. Its metal jaws had clamped around the cub's small paw, breaking the skin but thankfully not the bone. The trap was professional grade, designed to catch much larger animals. The sight of it filled Emily with anger toward whoever had set this cruel device. Working slowly and speaking in soothing tones, Emily searched for the release mechanism. The mother bear watched every movement, her massive body tense but not threatening. Emily found the spring that controlled the trap and pressed down with all her weight. The metal jaws reluctantly separated just enough for the cub to pull its injured paw free with a pitiful cry. The wounded cub scrambled to its mother, who immediately began licking the injury. Emily sank back onto the forest floor, exhaustion washing over her. She had done what she could without medical supplies, but the cub would need time to heal. Emily expected the bear family to leave now that the immediate crisis had passed. To her surprise, the mother bear settled down with her cubs, clearly intending to remain in the clearing. More surprising still was what happened several hours later. As evening approached, the mother bear rose and disappeared into the forest. Emily considered leaving while the bear was gone, but she was too weak from hunger and fatigue. Before she could gather the strength to move, the bear returned, carrying something in its powerful jaws. The bear dropped a freshly caught fish at Emily's feet, then backed away. The offering was unmistakable. Emily stared in disbelief at the fish, then at the bear who watched her expectantly. "For me?" Emily whispered. The bear made a soft chuffing sound that Emily was beginning to recognize as non-threatening. Hunger overcame any hesitation. Emily cleaned the fish as best she could and ate it raw, too desperate for sustenance to care about cooking. The mother bear seemed satisfied, returning to her cubs who played nearby, the injured one already moving better. That night, instead of seeking shelter elsewhere, Emily slept near the bear family. The mother bear positioned herself between Emily and the forest, creating a protective barrier against the dangers of the night. The temperature dropped sharply, but the cubs snuggled against their mother's warm fur, and Emily found herself inching closer to share some of that warmth. By morning, a profound shift had occurred. The unlikely alliance had saved both the cub and Emily. As she watched the mother bear gently tending to her young, Emily felt something she had not experienced in years: genuine connection. Not the conditional acceptance James had offered, but something pure and uncomplicated. The irony was not lost on her. Abandoned by her husband and left to die, she had found more compassion from a wild animal than from the man who had vowed to love her. The mother bear had recognized her not as prey but as an ally. Two mothers in their own way, helping each other survive in a hostile world. As the morning sun filtered through the trees, Emily awakened to find the mother bear already alert and watching her. The bear's cubs appeared stronger today, the injured one testing its weight on the healing paw. Emily's own situation remained dire, but her night of rest in the fish had restored some of her strength. The mother bear rose and made the now familiar motion that Emily had come to recognize as an invitation to follow. With nothing to lose, Emily trailed after the massive creature as it led her deeper into the forest. The bear moved with purpose, often stopping to sniff the air or investigate marks on trees. Their strange procession took an unexpected turn when the bear suddenly veered off the natural path and began pawing at the ground. Emily approached cautiously and discovered another trap hidden beneath a thin layer of leaves. Before she could react, the bear used its massive paw to trigger the trap from a safe distance. The metal jaws snapped shut with enough force to break bone. This pattern repeated throughout the morning. The mother bear would detect a hidden trap, signal Emily, then safely trigger it. Emily began to understand that they were following a line of traps, deliberately disabling each one they found. The bear was systematically destroying the very devices that had injured her cub. By midday, they crested a small ridge, and Emily spotted something that made her heart leap: a small cabin nestled among the trees. Human shelter. The bear stopped at the edge of the clearing, watching Emily with those intelligent eyes. "Is this what you wanted to show me?" Emily whispered. The cabin appeared weathered but intact. Emily approached cautiously, aware that the bear had chosen to remain hidden in the tree line. The door was secured with a simple padlock that had rusted over time. Emily found a rock and, with several desperate strikes, managed to break it open. Inside, the cabin revealed its true purpose. Hanging from hooks were animal pelts, including several bear skins. Tables held tools for skinning and processing animals. stacks of traps similar to the one that had caught the cub lined one wall. This was no ranger station or recreational cabin. This was a poacher's hideout. Emily felt sick at the evidence of systematic killing, but her desperation quickly turned to hope when she spotted a battery-powered radio on a shelf. Beside it lay logbooks detailing illegal hunts, maps marked with trap locations, and even photographs of men posing with their kills. As Emily examined the radio, she heard a commotion outside. The mother bear had emerged from hiding and was systematically destroying the stack of traps that had been left outside the cabin. With powerful swipes of her paws, she triggered each one, rendering them useless. Emily watched in amazement through the window as the bear methodically disabled the very tools designed to kill her kind. The bear's actions were too deliberate, too purposeful to be coincidence. Somehow this extraordinary animal had not only sought human help for her cub, but had also led Emily to evidence of the poaching operation that threatened her family and the means to call for rescue. Emily's hands trembled as she examined the radio. Though dusty, its power light glowed green when she pressed the button. Her heart raced with renewed hope. She adjusted the frequency dial, searching for the emergency channel she remembered from hiking safety brochures. "Mayday! Mayday!" she called into the microphone. "This is Emily Winters. I'm stranded in the northern wilderness area. I need urgent assistance." Her voice cracked with emotion as she described her location based on the maps she'd found in the cabin. After several attempts, a crackling response came through. "This is Ranger Station 6. We copy your mayday. Stay where you are. Search team will be dispatched. Over." Tears of relief streamed down Emily's face. Help was coming, but her moment of celebration was cut short by the sound of an approaching vehicle. Through the cabin's grimy window, she spotted a mud-splattered truck bouncing along an almost invisible forest road. The poachers were returning. Emily ducked down, frantically searching for a hiding place. The radio crackled again with the ranger asking for confirmation, but she dared not respond with the poachers so close. The truck doors slammed, and male voices carried through the air, complaining about triggered traps they'd found along their route. As the men approached the cabin, a thunderous roar shattered the forest quiet. The mother bear burst from the tree line, charging toward the poachers with terrifying speed. Her cubs remained hidden, but she positioned herself between the men and the cabin where Emily hid. The poachers shouted in alarm, scrambling for their rifles. The mother bear rose to her full height, her massive form silhouetted against the afternoon sun. One of the men fired a warning shot into the air, but the bear did not retreat. Instead, she dropped to all fours and began circling the men, cutting off their path to the cabin. "What the hell is wrong with this bear?" one man shouted. "They never attack like this." Inside the cabin, Emily grabbed the radio again. "The poachers are here," she whispered urgently. "There's a mother bear protecting me. Please hurry." The standoff continued for nearly an hour. The poachers made several attempts to reach the cabin, but each time the bear intercepted them, showing a strategic intelligence that left the men bewildered and increasingly frightened. They fired more warning shots but seemed reluctant to kill such a large trophy without proper equipment. The distant thrum of helicopter blades finally broke the tension. As the sound grew louder, the poachers looked skyward in alarm. Their momentary distraction was all the mother bear needed. She charged again, forcing the men to retreat to their truck. The helicopter appeared overhead just as the poachers attempted to flee. Spotlights pinned their vehicle in bright beams. Through a loudspeaker, rangers ordered them to stop and surrender. In the chaos that followed, Emily emerged from the cabin, wavering on unsteady legs. Park rangers rappelled from the helicopter, while others arrived in vehicles, quickly apprehending the poachers and rushing to Emily's aid. Throughout the commotion, the mother bear watched from the edge of the clearing, her cubs now visible beside her. Even as rangers approached Emily with blankets and water, the bear remained, as if ensuring the rescue was complete, before finally leading her cubs away into the protective shadows of the forest. Emily's incredible survival story exploded across national headlines within days of her rescue. Abandoned woman saved by mother bear dominated news cycles, with experts flocking to television studios to analyze the unprecedented behavior. Wildlife biologists expressed amazement at the bear's apparent ability to distinguish between threatening and helpful humans, calling it a revolutionary insight into bear cognition. Camera crews surrounded the hospital where Emily recovered, eager for interviews. She shared her ordeal with quiet dignity, describing the bear's intelligence and protective nature. The evidence she had discovered in the poacher's cabin led to the arrest of a notorious wildlife trafficking ring operating throughout the region. James watched his wife's rising fame with growing horror from his home. He had returned from the wilderness, claiming Emily had wandered off, even participating in initial search efforts with feigned concern. But when Emily revealed the truth of her abandonment on national television, his deception collapsed. Neighbors recognized him from the coverage, and overnight, James became a pariah. "The bear showed more humanity than my husband," Emily told reporters, a quote that rapidly went viral. When authorities charged James with reckless endangerment and attempted manslaughter, public opinion had already convicted him. His employer fired him, friends abandoned him, and his family disowned him as the full pattern of his abuse came to light through Emily's courage to finally speak out. 6 months later, Emily stood before a crowd at the ribbon-cutting ceremony for the new wildlife sanctuary, funded by donations that had poured in after her story broke. The sanctuary's primary mission: protecting the forest's bear population and rehabilitating injured wildlife. James watched from prison, where his 8-year sentence had just begun, alongside the poachers whose operation he had inadvertently exposed. "From tragedy comes transformation," Emily said into the microphones. "What was meant to destroy me instead connected me to something powerful and true." Behind her, in a protected section of the sanctuary, a familiar mother bear and her cubs explored their new safe territory. The sanctuary became Emily's new purpose. She worked alongside rangers and wildlife experts, her firsthand experience with the mother bear providing valuable insights into conservation efforts. On quiet evenings, Emily would sometimes sit at the observation point overlooking the bear family's favorite meadow. The mother bear would often pause during her foraging, raising her head to acknowledge Emily's presence with a look of recognition that still brought tears to Emily's eyes. Two survivors from different worlds, bound by an extraordinary moment of trust that had changed both their lives forever. Has this incredible survival story touched your heart? There are more amazing animal encounters and inspiring human journeys waiting for you. Subscribe to our YouTube channel now for daily stories of extraordinary connections between humans and wildlife. Never miss another tale of courage, redemption, and the surprising intelligence of animals in our world. Click that subscribe button and join our community of nature lovers and storytellers today.